I'd like to call the June Landmarks Board meeting to order at 6:01. Welcome to the June 3rd, 2026 Landmarks Board meeting. As I said, it's just 6:01, now it's 6:02. Marcy will review the virtual meeting decorum.
But in the meantime, the city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board and commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. More about this vision and the project's community engagement process can be found online. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimonies shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenities, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited, and participants may raise their hand to speak during open comment and public comment periods during hearings. Individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Here's a couple where the menu is. If you're joining on a PC, it's Alt-Y, Option Y if you're on a Mac, and *9 if you're calling in on a phone, or you can find that reactions button to raise your hand in the menu bar. Thank you. Back to you, Chair. Filling in.
Thank you. We'll do a roll call and brief introductions. As of note, Chelsea Castellano and Renee Golubic are absent this evening. We do have a quorum. Go for it, Alex.
Alex Weinheimer, member.
John Decker, member of the board.
And I'm Michael Ray, Vice Chair, acting as chair this evening. As I mentioned, we have a quorum. We know that people who are here to participate may have some strong emotions about any projects on the docket. We want to hear from you and have found it more productive if you are speaking to persuade us rather than berating us, staff, or the applicant. As with regular Landmark board meetings, you may only speak at the appropriate time during the public hearing. Requests to speak outside of those times will be denied. We request that members of the public who wish to let us know by raising their hand, virtual hand, that they want to speak. As acting board chair, I will call for a roll call on any motions made. First item is the approval of minutes from last month. Does any board member have changes or alterations to the May 6th meeting minutes? Hearing none, I move that these minutes be approved. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, John. Roll call vote. Alex?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. We'll move on to the public participation for non-agenda items. This is an opportunity to speak to topics other than the public hearing docket. As a reminder, we are no longer swearing people in for open comment. If anybody wishes to speak, please sign up with Mariah. Mariah, do we have any in-person speakers this evening?
No in-person speakers this evening.
We'll move on to the virtual participants. As a reminder, if you'd like to speak, please raise your virtual hand. Mariah, do we have any virtual speakers this evening?
Yes, we do. First up, we have Lynn Siegel.
Lynn Siegel, I ask that you state your full name, proceed, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Lynn Siegel, and I have to say I'm really disappointed. One, that you don't even want to see my face. That's really pitiful. Two, that the bungalows are coming down to put up 3, 4 stories apartments so that Don Trump can promote low-income housing tax credits throughout the United States and displace people all over and increase the demand by increasing the demand for housing by funding it, because the developer then has to, gets matching funds. And as a result, we do developments that we would not normally do. For example, the transportation thing that's going up through Arapahoe is encouraging sprawl out East Arapahoe so that we can have better commute times for those people that are coming in as service servants to the elite in Boulder. And then we see the charm and the character lost with projects like Presbyterian Manor, feeling entitled that as a senior living space, they have the right to demand these LIHTC funds and to take out our 4 bungalows. It's a crime. It's nothing short of a crime for Landmark's folks. And I'm really sad that this has to go this way. My dad came here in 48, 49, and we lived here in 60. And what happened? What happened that Boulder got sold out? Because that's what it is. And also, it's really a distinction. Landmarks Board is Landmarks Board. Planning Board is Planning Board. There's a distinction between the two. The Housing Board is a different board. The demand for housing should not be expressed for landmarked items. And that one bungalow should never have been sectored out from the others. What can I say? This is not even a Landmarks Board, in my view. And why can't you do the right thing? Why do you always have to cavitate to the dollar bill of the developer? Because that's what it is every single time. I follow 5 city boards and I've seen it, and it's revolting. Why? Why do you do that? Where's my timer? I don't even see that. I don't even deserve a timer. I don't deserve to have my face shown.
Thank you, Lynn. If anyone else would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand. All right, looks like that's it.
Thank you, Lynn. We'll now move on to discussion of landmark alteration and demolition applications issued and pending. Marcy, do we have any pending applications for discussion?
Thank you. So we do not have any pending stays of demolition, which is usually what we talk about at this point on the agenda, but we do have a request for an extension to a landmark alteration certificate that the Landmarks Board approved. Here we go. Back in 2025. And so the Boulder Revised Code allows the approving authority, so in this case, the Landmarks Board, to grant an extension for a landmark alteration certificate for a time longer than 1 year if good cause is shown for the extension, that they need more time to submit for a building permit. And so this is a project at 600 Spruce Street in the Mapleton Hill Historic District. And it had kind of a larger project in 2020 that the Landmarks Board approved for rehabilitation of the contributing house and construction of an addition. And then about 5 years later, the Landmarks Board reviewed a second landmark alteration certificate for the construction of the accessory dwelling unit that you see on the screen, and some retaining walls adjacent to it. And that LAC was finalized in June of last year and is good for 1 year. And so the properties owners have reached out to staff to ask for an extension. And if you just give me a second here. Let me just go here. And if I, so sorry. And so what their justification is that, let me actually just wait here. This is a pretty large rehabilitation of this contributing property. They had some stumbles along the way. One of their contractors passed away, unfortunately, and so they've had a longer time with their landscaping and the house that they won't make the deadline for June 11th to apply for the building permit for this accessory dwelling unit. And so they're asking for additional time. I don't think they specified how much time, but I would recommend 1 year would be enough. Otherwise, after June 11th, they would need to reapply and come back in a public hearing for the same plans as the Landmarks Board approved in January of 2025. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. This is the code section that provides the authority for the Landmarks Board to extend an approval for LACs, and then there is motion language here if the board chooses.
Alex or John, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any.
I do have a question. And just because the LDRC approved a follow-up, I imagine, for the accessory dwelling with conditions, has there been dialogue with the owner about responding to those conditions with any updates on their design package?
Yes, so the Landmarks Board conditionally approved the project in January, and then in June, the LDRC reviewed those conditions. So the project was revised, and then the LDRC found that it met the conditions and issued the LAC.
Okay. Alex or John, do you want to make a motion to?
I guess the question is, so we just simply move and vote at this point. That's the correct procedure.
That's it.
If we agree that a year sounds appropriate, I think that would be the only thing that, and I don't know why we would challenge that, but
Yeah, I don't have any challenges. I would be willing to make a motion.
proceed.
I move to extend the approval period for landmark alteration certificate HIS 2024-00283 for 1 additional year, expiring June 3rd, 2027, finding the applicant has shown good cause on why additional time is necessary to apply for building permits.
I'll second that.
Thank you both. We'll do a roll call vote if there are no other items to discuss. Alex?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously, 3-0 with 2 absent. Thank you, guys. We'll move on to public hearings. We have item 5A 990 Arapahoe Avenue. This is a public hearing and consideration of a landmark alteration certificate application to demolish an existing accessory building at 1039. Oh, I'm sorry. This is not 990. I'll keep going. to demolish an existing accessory building at 1039 Mapleton Avenue, a contributing property in the Mapleton Hill Historic District pursuant to Section 9-11-18 of the Boulder Revised Code 1981 and under the procedures prescribed by Chapter 1-3 Quasi Judicial Hearings, BRC 1981. The owner is Charles Dauber and Sylvia and Charles Dauber, and the applicant is George Watt. I will hand it over to Claire for staff presentation.
Thank you, Michael. All speaking to the item will be sworn in, as this is a quasi-judicial hearing. That includes me. I'm Claire Brandt, Historic Preservation Planner, and I affirm that I will tell the truth. And I'm going to pause to allow the board members to note any ex parte contacts. A reminder that Michael and Renee, who's absent today, have reviewed the property recently at LDRC, but not this proposal. So ex parte contacts, anybody?
Mm-mm.
Okay, seeing none, I'll carry on. Here is an overview of the process tonight. I'll give the staff presentation, and after that, the board may ask questions. The applicant will have up to 10 minutes to present to the board, then we'll open up the public hearing. After all members of the public have made comments, the applicant may respond to anything that was said, and then the board will deliberate. A motion typically requires an affirmative vote of at least 3 members to pass. As we have just 3 members present, it will need to be a unanimous vote. A record of this hearing is available in a couple of days as a video recording, and the official record is added to the archive within 28 days, usually much sooner. As we do record the meetings as the official record, I'd like to remind everyone to speak clearly into the microphone. The criteria for review are outlined in the Boulder Revised Code under 91118 B and C. And this review is to ensure that the proposed work preserves, enhances, or restores and does not damage exterior architectural features of the property, does not adversely affect the historic architectural value of the property. The architecture, arrangement, texture, color, arrangement of color, and materials are compatible with the character of the property, and that the Landmarks Board considers the economic feasibility of alternatives, incorporation of energy-efficient design, and enhanced access for the disabled. The options today are for the Landmarks Board to approve the application, and this is subject to a 16-day City Council call-up period, where City Council can choose to review the decision. The Landmarks Board may also deny the application, which would be subject to a 30-day period, which Council could review the decision, and that's the applicant's appeals process. However, denial would mean that the applicant could not submit a substantially similar application within 12 months. So if the board is heading in that direction, we typically allow the applicant an opportunity to withdraw. The process so far for this property, on December 17th, 2025, the Landmarks Design Review Committee reviewed and approved a landmark alteration certificate for the rehabilitation of the primary building, construction of a rear addition, retaining walls and fences, and construction of a new one-car garage. In its review, the LDRC considered the primary building to be contributing to the Mapleton Hill Historic District. On March 23rd, we accepted a landmark alteration certificate application to demolish an existing accessory building on the property. The Boulder Revised Code requires review in a public hearing for demolition of any building on a designated property. It also provides that when demolition of an existing building in a historic district is proposed, the proposed new construction should be reviewed concurrently. However, there's no new construction proposed, and restoration of the site will not include any hardscaping. So there's no project description or analysis of any new construction. So that brings us to the hearing today, which is just for the demolition of the accessory building. Here's the property. It's at 1039 Mapleton Avenue. It's on the north side of Mapleton, just west of Broadway. It is within the boundaries of the Mapleton Hill Historic District. The purple blobs that you see there are historic districts. The rear of the property abuts the alley, and the farmer's ditch crosses the property. This is the site from the alley. The primary house in the background is on the south side of the farmer's ditch at the southwest corner of the lot. The house faces Mapleton Avenue, so this is the rear of the house. The subject accessory building in the foreground is on the north side of the farmer's ditch at the northeast corner of the lot. As I mentioned, there is an approved LAC for work ongoing at the house. However, my understanding is that the work exceeded the issued permit, and the Landmarks Board may have questions about the current state of the primary building. And we can provide general information, but the board should focus the discussion on the accessory building tonight. This is the accessory building. It's a frame building, approximately 12 foot by 20 foot. It has a front gable roof with a moderate pitch and exposed rafter tails. The building has two openings, a single car garage door at the north elevation facing the alley and a person door at the south elevation. In 2005, the City of Boulder undertook a survey of all of the accessory buildings in the district. The survey recommended the accessory building be considered contributing to the historic character of the historic district. However, the ongoing practice of the Historic Preservation Program is to determine the status of a building at the time of review. A primary concern of the Landmarks Board in reviewing proposed changes in historic districts is the protection of the character of the site and district. The Landmarks Board must determine whether the demolition of the accessory building would damage or destroy the exterior architectural features of the property within a district, or adversely affect the special character or special historic, architectural, or aesthetic interest or value of the site or the district. Demolition of buildings that contribute to the historic character of the district are generally more likely to adversely affect the special character, interest, or value of the site or district. We have definitions for buildings within a historic district, and a contributing building is defined as one that's built during the district's period of significance, that exists in comparatively original condition, or that have been appropriately restored and clearly contribute to the historic significance of the district. However, in this case, staff considered the building meets the definition of a non-contributing building, which includes buildings constructed during the period of significance that have been altered to such an extent that historic information is not interpretable and restoration is not possible, and buildings erected outside the period of significance that are not individually significant. And individually significant buildings would be those eligible for the National Register of Historic Places or for local landmark designation. So I will go through how we made that determination. The accessory building was constructed around 1946 at the end of the period of significance of the Mapleton Hill Historic District, which spans 81 years from 1865 to 1946. The building was constructed by Dora and Clayton Powell, who owned the property from 1938 until 1951, and they used it to store their car. The building does not convey a strong association with residents during the 1865 to 1946 period of development in the neighborhood, as it was constructed during the last year of that period and primarily used outside of that period. The garage door opening is likely original to the building, which may have included an overhead operation garage door. The first upward lifting garage door was manufactured around 1921 and popularized in the late 1930s. So the inclusion of one when this building was constructed in 1946 is likely. However, as we were unable to locate photographs of the building that predate 2005, we are unable to confirm this. The building is clad in asphalt-like siding with a printed brick pattern. This type of siding was an innovation during the 1930s as it became a maintenance-free alternative to painted wood siding or shingle. The brand name Insul Brick was marketed as a tar-coated fiberboard siding with a slightly embossed stone or brick pattern, enhanced with added granular material on the outer surface. Similar material became popular in the 1940s as people looked for a cheaper alternative to traditional building materials during the Depression and the subsequent Second World War. The cladding is likely original to the building as the material was used during the period of construction, although again, there are no photographs or other documentation to confirm this. Additionally, the cladding is at the end of its life and cannot be rehabilitated, repaired, or replaced in kind as the material is no longer manufactured. Additionally, the original wood shingle roof has been replaced as required by Boulder's building code. The setting of the accessory building at the rear of the property abutting the alley and the surrounding context has not changed over time. The alley retains a historic feel, and aerial images show that the area was densely covered with trees by 1948. However, the form, footprint, and setting of the building are the only aspects that we can confirm have integrity to the original construction of the accessory building. Because we are unable to confirm how the building has been altered and because restoration of the building is not possible, we considered that the building does not contribute to the special historic, architectural, or aesthetic value of the site or district. And we found that demolition of the existing accessory building would not adversely affect the special character and special historical, architectural, and aesthetic interest and value of the historic property and the Mapleton Hill Historic District, as the proposal will not damage the historic character of the subject property, will not damage or destroy the exterior architectural features of the property, and will not adversely affect the special character or special historic architectural and value of the subject property, and is consistent with the general design guidelines and the Mapleton Hill Historic District Guidelines and Section 911-18B3 of the Boulder Revised Code. So our recommended motion is to approve the application. The criteria for your decision this evening is, as I mentioned, in 911-18 and considers whether the project meets the standards for issuance of a landmark alteration certificate. And the options in front of you this evening are to either approve the LAC application, approve with conditions, or deny the application if you believe it does not meet these standards. So that's the end of the staff presentation. As a reminder, in the next steps in the process, the applicant will have up to 10 minutes to present to the board, followed by public participation, an opportunity for the applicant to respond to anything that's said, and then board deliberation. Does anyone have any questions for staff? Michael, you're so eager. Before we move on.
I was going to ask the same. Thank you, Claire.
Okay.
John or Alex, any questions? I don't see anybody here, but Mariah, are there any owners present online virtually, whether it's Charles, Sylvia, or the applicant, George Watt?
Yes, there are. I will promote them now.
Okay.
Can you guys hear us or see us?
Hi, Claire, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Terrific.
George, we're going to start your 10 minutes if you're ready to go.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My name is George Watt. I am an architect working with Charles and Sylvia Dauber on the project. And the project really at this point is the house that we have the landmark alteration certificate in hand for, along with a repair permit that was issued by the city to repair the existing foundation on the house, which is why you saw some of those earlier photographs of the house showing the house being repaired. In order to repair it, the contractor determined that that rear wall needed to come down. And so that rear wall is in process of coming down, but it's all it's in compliance with the LAC. So focusing now on the garage, Claire did a great job, describing the character and the history of the building. I just have a few photographs that I'd like to present to demonstrate the deteriorated condition of the building in support of allowing us to remove the building from the property. Once the building is removed, if you do approve that, the owners anticipate creating a garden in the rear of the yard or north of the ditch. There's no intent right now to replace it with any construction of any kind that doesn't include landscape. So this first slide shows some of the siding falling off the building, and on the right side of the slide lower, you'll see that the earth has started to berm itself up against the building, which has promoted a good amount of rot and removal of some of the exterior siding over time by weather. Claire, do I have the ability to move the slides along? No, thank you. So this is just showing some of the earth that's been bermed up against the existing garage, some of the rot that's starting down in the lower left-hand corner. And you can see obviously that some of that pressed brick embossed tar paper has been removed. Here's another example of the rot on the exterior of the building. We'll keep moving along. This should be pretty quick. Another example of, where that siding is removed and the rot that is, presenting itself on the exterior of the building. This is a upside down slide of the door where the people door on the south side of the building that shows again how much the earth has bermed itself up against the lower portion of the building, which is just creating the rot throughout the structure itself. And here's a shot of the interior. The next couple of shots will be also shots of the interior. I think at some point, someone put wood on the floor in direct contact with the soil and put some particle board on top of it to use the building for storage. And of course, all of that structure and sheathing has rotted away. And so you can see here in this slide, the rot that is present in the existing sheathing of the roof. And I believe that would be the last slide that I sent over. So this was just a quick presentation just to give you a little bit more detailed information on the deteriorated condition of the building. And that wraps up our presentation. With 7 minutes to spare.
Thank you, George.
Just 1 second, George. Would you mind just swearing or affirming that the testimony you just gave was the truth?
Yes, I affirm.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to public comment. Virtual attendees are to now raise their hand or press *9 if you'd like to speak to this particular docket item. Mariah, do we have anybody online that has raised their hand?
Yes, we've got one. Lynn Siegel.
Okay, I would ask Lynn that you raise your hand virtually. In addition to the hand you already have raised virtually. Swear to tell the board the whole truth, state your full name, and proceed with 3 minutes. Thanks.
I'm Lynn Siegel, and I swear to tell the truth as I know it. Not the truth as I know it. This building looks like it's fine for demo. It's pretty clearly, but this is a perfect example. It's nothing like those bungalows. Those bungalows should have stayed. It's just unspeakable. And we need to divest of Israel, and we need to free Palestine. And then we will have the funds in this country for historic preservation, much more than we have now, and to do much more preservation of, the character and the classic appearance of our cities and towns in the United States. Done. Bye.
Thank you, Lynn.
Would the owner applicant like to respond to the public comment?
No, thank you.
Brian, are there any other virtual?
No
Should have
more.
asked that first. We'll move on to board discussion. John, Alex?
This is pretty straight ahead, and it's an example of a building that has environmentally degraded past the point where it's reasonable to save it. There may be some usable material left in the building. Hopefully that would get redirected in the demo process. But other than that, I think this is a straight ahead. It doesn't really contribute anything, and so there's no reason to preserve it.
I agree and support the staff recommendation for demolition at this point. Don't seem to be too many other options for this structure as is.
I do have one question for staff. And I know some people kind of go crazy for this thing, but this asphalt brick pattern material, can we think of examples where that exists in Boulder that is in better shape?
I don't know any. Marcy, do you know?
I've noticed it on some accessory buildings in Whittier, but that was a couple years ago, and I don't know if it's in better or worse condition.
Yeah, I've seen it around various places. It is no longer an available material, so it seems to be generally in the same condition wherever you see it. It reminds me of it's a material that's used in the Ohio Valley a lot. I've seen it a lot in like mining towns and stuff in Kentucky and Ohio. So, but it's again, it's a old material now. It's not being made.
Is part of the process, this is another one that would get some degree of documentation before it's demolished. Is there, no?
No, that provision is in the non-designated demolition approval, not the landmark alteration certificate. Even though they're both demolitions, you might ask the owners if they're open to documenting or preserving a piece of this. But we don't have the same ability to require it as part of the approval.
Like I said, it's not, there are other people that would go a little nuts for this kind of like historic materiality. I'm not one, so it wouldn't be me, but maybe that's for the purist of the historic preservation material community to reach out to the owner and ask for a sample. For the museum, I don't know. Sorry to bring that up. I did think, Claire, that your comment about its use in lieu of painted wood, clapboard, etc. I'm like, and in lieu of brick, actual brick, which
Right.
it's trying to simulate. Sorry to go off on a tangent. I support the staff recommendation as well, and I think we could probably move forward with a motion if we have that language. Alex, is it your lucky day?
Sure. I move that the Landmarks Board adopt the staff memorandum dated June 3rd, 2026 as the findings of the board and approve the application for a landmark alteration certificate to demolish an existing accessory building at 1039 Mapleton Avenue. HIS 2026-00036, a contributing property in the Mapleton Hill Historic District. Finding that the proposal meets the standards for issuance of a landmark alteration certificate in Chapter 91118 Boulder Revised Code 1981 and is consistent with the general design guidelines.
I'll second the motion. Do a roll call vote. John?
Aye.
Alex?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Great, thank you. Thank you, George and Sylvia and Charles for joining us this evening. Next steps is that the City Council has up to 16 days to decide whether to review or call up the decision. If they do not call it up, the LAC will be issued. In the case that City Council does want to review the decision, we will be in touch within and schedule that hearing within 45 days. It's rare. So thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate what you do for Boulder, so thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to see you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Move to matters. Marcy?
Thank you. So we have two items under matters this evening. The first is welcoming our colleagues in the Parks and Recreation Department to give you all kind of a project overview of the East Bookend Public-Private Partnership, P3. And then after that, I'll have a very brief kind of recap of the Archaeology and Historic Preservation Month Awards ceremony that was held earlier in May. So welcome to Shihomi and to Jake. Come on up.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. Excited to be back at the Landmarks Board for Civic Area. I do want to, yes, I'm Shihomi Kuriagawa. I'm the project manager for Civic Area. I'm with the Parks Department, and I'm joined here by a colleague and Deputy Project Manager Jake Minden. We're going to walk through the Civic Area East Bookend Public-Private Partnership, like Marcy mentioned. I do just want to note that this is a different process than the Civic Area Phase 2 design that we last connected with you last year on, but we will be back for an update on that process in a few months. So for this time, we'll review together that East Bookend P3, as we call it, public-private partnership, and the opportunity around that. I'll give you some context behind this separate process, and then just note the historic landmarks that are included in the East Bookend, and then where we're headed in terms of schedule and next steps and when we can be expected next at the board. Sorry, I might move this slightly up. So just to set the stage a little bit and locate you for civic area again one more time. It's been a while since we've been back to talk to the board. Civic area is sort of in the heart of downtown, connection to Pearl at the north, and then also connection to CU campus at the south, along with the Hill. The project includes park space in that green area that you see. A Boulder Creek runs through it, and then an arboretum connection that heads up to CU campus. So that's really the scope of the entirety of the project, and then kind of location and context. Lots of influence into this area from downtown and campus fabric, but also we're hoping to make great improvements and influence out as well. Okay, so let's get into what the P3 and the East Bookend process actually is. I'm going to sit on this slide for a second and do a little bit more context building. This entire plan that you see is what we've been working on for the past 2 years in terms of overall design and public engagement. It includes the East and the West Bookend, and this is all off of the back of several years of planning and community engagement in the 2015 Civic Area Park Plan. So this whole area was re-envisioned together with a park at the core, as well as new development coming in on the East and West Bookend. As you can see here by the plan, I'm going to sit on the right-hand side of the plan where it's labeled East Bookend, and that yellow boundary is what we're going to focus most of our conversation on tonight. So what the P3 opportunity for this area really is coming together with a lot of the community feedback, engagement, and the planning process, and leveraging some city-owned assets. So everything in the yellow is city-owned property. And what we're hoping to do is go out to a public solicitation to really draw in a private sector development partnership. And so we're hoping that this development partnership will breathe new life into the East Bookend. We will look at how to integrate and reuse existing and landmarked buildings, such as the atrium and storage and transfer building. We're looking to do some infill development on East Bookend and thinking about how we get community benefit out of either arts and culture, food market hall, so all sorts of opportunity, maybe even housing to be developed in this area, all in the mind and under the guise of the community vision of Civic Area Park Plan. So that's the East Bookend. I will just note that I have highlighted in yellow as well the West Bookend boundary. And that is going to be a part of the opportunity to seek a developer partnership as an optional alternate. So really the major opportunity and offering is East Bookend, and then we'll see if development collaboration wants to also take a look at the West End with us. So talking about that park plan off the back of a lot of community engagement, stakeholder conversations, as well as previous planning, we've identified some really key themes for the East Bookend and wanting to collaborate with a potential private sector development partner on this. One of them would be a food theme. So the Boulder County Farmers Market is home here. It is now currently outdoor on 13th Street. So that's sort of on the west boundary of that yellow line work that you see. So how can we incorporate the Boulder Farmers Market in the East Bookend, not only in an outdoor venue, but also trying to find them an indoor year-round facility as well in the East Bookend. Thinking about arts and culture, so that's that community benefit that the city can bring to this teaming and this partnership. How do we make sure and ensure there's some cultural amenities and or some arts amenities within the development, as well as, of course, recreation. So how will this development really integrate into the rest of that park plan and really speak to a public sector vision and have things like community events and have fabulous public open space in this very key downtown area. To get into the detail of what's existing in the East Bookend, we've just highlighted so the 3 landmark buildings, what we're hoping to reprogram and definitely draw, you know, design inspiration and look at the character and make sure a lot of the reason why we landmarked these buildings is integrated within the design and within the development is the atrium building, the storage and transfer building, and the tea house. So all 3 buildings are landmarked within the East Bookend. We're also putting up for this opportunity the city-owned surface parking lots. So there's great opportunity here to look at introducing new buildings or infill development, and as well thinking about what we don't necessarily have in terms of ownership or control in, but what would be at sort of private sector discretion is if they would want to negotiate with private properties. So you can see some of those properties that we have outside of the boundary. Those are all privately owned. They're not currently in our P3 process, but it's up to, you know, the development community or partners if they wish to try and negotiate. That could be a certain potential there. Okay, so this is just, again, another look at what is landmarked, and what's in red is that true landmark boundary. You can see the atrium and the storage and transfer building within the East Bookend would be up for some adaptive reuse, potential programming as we think about especially the atrium and city staff moving out of this building over the next couple of years. What could this building be? What community benefit could the building play in terms of the design? Could this be the indoor home of the Boulder County Farmers Market? So looking at potential there. And then I want to note that the tea house wall will draw inspiration off of the building. The land use will stay the same. The tenant will remain the same. The band shell is not in the East Bookend offering, although I will get into some potential improvements that we're looking at on the city side for the band shell, but that's at this time not part of the East Bookend public-private partnership. And then, of course, because there are landmarked properties, as we go through design with our partner, the developer and any design will have to go through and will comply with historic preservation regulations. So this slide just looks at what of the city's involvement would be in terms of what investment we're going to make is directly adjacent to the public-private partnership and the East Bookend. This is the phase 2, what we spoke about earlier, what we kind of reviewed with the board last year, and what we'll be back to review together with you all in the landmark boundary for phase 2 park improvements. But this includes updates to a new playground, outdoor dining, and expanded green lawn. There could be potential updates that we look to improving the band shell, as well as 13th Street. So 13th Street is right directly adjacent to the East Bookend. And so, of course, incentivizing private development to come in and take advantage, quite frankly, of all of the investment the city is putting in. So not only taking advantage, but then hoping to work with that partner on how do we integrate these great public outdoor spaces and make sure there's a connection through the development with the development of that public open space. Is there anything to add there, Jake, on? Okay. All right, so part of the P3 process and where we have been included an RFI. So that RFI is a request for interest. And really this was a very informal process just to get a beat on what the market is going to tell us is possible on the East Bookend. So initially we launched and held a forum for the Civic Area East Bookend in 2025 in October. And that was just a general call for interested parties to learn more about the project. We then posted the informal RFI on February on 2026, and then followed up with reviewing submissions. We had all kinds of respondents. I believe it was 9 submittals total, and that ranged from a group of developers, so full teams submitting with financial partners, developers, designers, the full package, all the way to individuals submitting. So whether that was a design firm or people interested in reprogramming individual buildings. So quite the gamut and quite the range. It was great to see that we had such excitement for this opportunity. And what the RFI will really do for us, it will feed in some of those responses, some of that information that we got back from the team members into the RFP process. So that would be the request for proposal, and that will be a formal process in looking for a city partnership. So again, responses from the RFI have helped build the RFP, but I do also just want to reiterate 2015 park plan, as well as a lot of community engagement and stakeholder discussions also went into sort of building this entire process and the RFP. And then where we're headed for the RFP. So this is where we're at now in the process, and then you can see the look ahead of where we're going. It's quite a lengthy process, so we do have several years ahead of us. But where we're currently sitting at in the RFP is a target release of the proposal in late 2026. We will have the Boulder County Farmers Market as a core partner included in there. Again, that's part of the benefit of partnership, is coming in and making sure there is community benefit woven into the development. And then also, you know, the RFP process will be this kind of more formalized and finalized movement into finding an eligible private sector partner to embark on this development with us. So the RFP, the interviews that will come from that on different groups that submit, and then final selection of a partner will take us through to the end of 2026, maybe early 2027. But then you can see after selecting a partner, we'll do a pre-development agreement. The pre-development agreement will include a process that will go through design and concept planning together. So what I just showed you is absolutely a placeholder. It is not final design. So we'll do a whole design process with our future partner. And then we'll move into site plan review and a final partnership agreement in 2028. So getting into that detailed design, LAC review, all of that will be a few years out, and then potentially construction in 2029. Now, I don't know if construction is in totality of that full bookend or if it's phased out. But this schedule is absolutely forecasting at this point. It's very generalized, and it's very sort of pending the status of, can we find a good and well-fitted partner, as well as planning process, construction, and, you know, any market sector delays. So subject to change.
One thing to add on the RFP will make really clear what the landmark properties are within the East Bookend, the value they add to the block, and the required process for editing or changing in the design process.
So next steps for this board would be coming back for an opportunity for informal input. So similar to what we did on civic area design, when we get through the concept planning of East Bookend, we can have that informal input from this board, and that would be in 2027. And then when we would move through landmark alteration certificate review would be at earliest 2028. And then I just include the updates on our website that you can follow along for the P3 process. For now, input we're seeking from you all are, so any questions and input on the RFP process that we've showed here tonight for the development or potential future development? And then is there any questions about Landmark's role in the development approach to East Bookend?
Do you have any questions? I mean, I can start it off if that's okay. Were the expressions of interest, the responses, are those public?
So we have a summary that's included as public on our project website that kind of reviews ideas that came in from groups. So you can see it there. And, you know, if interested, I can go into some detail about the types of responses. Yep.
Right now?
Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess I can go check it out for myself, but I would be curious to know if there were, well, I don't want to put you on the spot. I was going to say, like, what surprises did you get? But I am personally very, and this is outside of the historic or the landmarks board, but and I think I expressed this the last time that we talked about this general project. But I really like that asphalt area just north of the tea house because of the amenity it provides during the farmers market for places to sit and eat in the shade. I'm not sure I would be as interested in going indoors for that kind of thing. Is a farmers market, which is not year round. So have they expressed interest in having a year-round presence on Saturdays on 13th Street? And then just to dovetail this in, is 13th Street part of the P3 boundary or is it part of the city boundary? Because I noticed that red line. Yeah. So it's 13th Street, which is the predominant footprint of the farmers market stalls and whatnot, not this little finger that I've said is my favorite little part of it, but it's not part of the P3. So it's curious. I'm glad that you said that that the farmers market was kind of a partner stakeholder, but the boundary would suggest otherwise.
Yeah, so all good questions. I just wanted to point out back to this slide on the pink boundary. Can I point on this? Can you see my mouse? Oh, I guess you can't really see my mouse. But just inside that pink boundary on the east side is 13th Street improvements, and the city would be looking to update those improvements. So we'll be going through the council approved 18 million funding for phase 2, and we'll be making large upgrades to 13th Street. So that includes pedestrianizing the street, making sure the utilities are updated, electrified the street so that it supports more events, farmers market and outside of farmers market events. Then to your other question, I can quickly summarize RFI submissions. I would say that a lot of the submissions were great. They were really surprising actually on how much the teams worked to integrate a community benefit. A lot of them, I think the majority of them did talk to the farmers market ahead of time. They were excited about existing partnerships that we have with the farmers market. A lot of folks had some ideas on future partnerships like with Sundance. A lot of folks talked about a mix of uses, housing, commercial, hotel, retail. So a lot of ideas went into this that also I think were really great and spoke to either Boulder opportunities like housing or supporting local Boulder businesses. So it's fabulous to see. Did I get all of your questions?
I think I can pick up on one
thank you.
more. The finger, as you called it, the asphalt pad that, it is.
And it's not a parking lot, right?
No. It does serve a valuable function now, and the P3 project is committed to the connection of the development into the park space. So that means emphasizing public space as a part of the development, whether that's a plaza in the same location or somewhere else, but that's one of our key goals for sure.
At this time, is the city just looking at this one block of 13th Street, or is there also some consideration of connection south of here up to the hill and potential improvements to the Arboretum?
Yes, great question. I did cut it off the slide to zoom in on the majority of civic area, but absolutely, the connection up Arboretum path is something that is also integrated into the full design and future improvements of civic area. I will say the Arboretum path specifically is not funded at this time. What you see in pink is funded for the phase 2 in our approved budget.
Okay, thank you.
John?
Yeah, I think that what I'm seeing, the kind of working schematic that you've placed on the land makes sense. I think that the importance of that plaza space, and it does indeed function like a traditional plaza when it's in full use during the farmers market and other events. I think that the way things are set up here um, in this schematic is essentially the correct approach by embracing that space. As to whether it gets developed in some way beyond what it is now, that's part of the coming process. I think that even though I understand why it was done the way it was done, the properties that are outside immediate, I guess, that are outside of your ability to include at this point. Has there been any kind of aspirational thinking as to what could happen in that area and what the value of those properties might be as they stand now?
Yeah, it's a great question. Certainly, we did study this throughout the 2015 park plan. If the whole block was consolidated, we also recently studied it in the last couple of years. At this time, because we're only offering city ownership and really seeing what the private sector wants to do, can do, and how it can include the full block is sort of up to our developer partner. But we have studied it before. Obviously, it would make the whole block more developable, more efficient, and then there's just a little bit more programming that's possible. But we definitely wanted to take a more conservative approach at this time.
Okay, the kind of sub question I have, the fact that this is very kind of a developer driven process, or it may turn out to be. How is the arts component, or is there any vision for an arts component in this that the developer is either going to have to accommodate or is going to have to like accord to some other group? Has there been any exploration of that at all yet with BMoCA leaving that facility, which could have arts utility in some other form or application?
Yeah, absolutely. The city and, our design team that's a part of the civic area currently has studied, what are all the different mix of uses, and definitely arts and culture component has come up. It's part of one of our guiding principles in the park plan to have arts and culture woven throughout civic area. And it was identified in that park plan that arts and culture would be key at one of the bookends. Some of our RFI submissions acknowledge that, with the excitement of Sundance, with the excitement of existing arts community and representatives working on what is possible there. So we've had a whole host of ideas in terms of arts and culture.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
joining
much.
us. Yeah. It's nice to see the update and that things are moving forward. It's
Awesome.
sit on the edge of our seats waiting for next steps.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Marcy has a brief summary of awards. You may have to just mime.
Few. Okay, I just wanted to take a moment and recognize all the work that went into the awards ceremony that was held on May 18th, and also some of the really great projects and people that were recognized. And so there are 3 books that were recognized. One was about the history of Niwot by Kathy Kohler, and then the Truth, Restoration, and Education Commission reports by the People of the Sacred Land are available for free online about Indigenous history in the Boulder Valley and beyond. And also want to put a plug in that the ethnographic reports that the city of Boulder has been working with various tribal nations over the last couple years was just published, and I'll send out an email link to that. But it's similar to the work that Golden did a couple years ago to really understand the history and significance, both in the past, present, and future, to Indigenous tribes. So that's exciting work. And then there was a 3rd book about making each other laugh, contemporary Arapaho storytelling. So some really great kind of local history books, cultural books published in 2025. We recognized 3 landmarks that were that you all saw last year: the Sirotkin Woodman House, the Tiara House, and the Orchard House. And those owners, there were also 3 county landmarks recognized. And then for the special projects, the Heritage Roundtable recognized the restoration of the Boulder Theater facade, the Superior Museum reconstruction after the Marshall Fire, the Boulder County Latine and Chicano History Project, which we would love to invite that group maybe here to talk a bit about that work, because they did a really neat partnership with some teens to look through archives and start to tell that history. And then, of course, the Proclaiming Colorado's Black History, which was a award-winning museum exhibit and lecture series and so much more that the Museum of Boulder worked on, and it's now traveling across the state, currently in Pueblo. So some really amazing projects and some really incredible people recognized. Dan Corson gave a really nice remarks about Martha Campbell and her sister Marie Campbell, who were twin sisters who lived on Uni Hill, 97 years old, I think. Very long history with volunteering for Historic Boulder and associated with the CU Library. And then the event of the night, the Square Nails, recognized 4 folks for kind of lifetime achievement awards. Leonard Siegel, who recently stepped down as the executive director of Historic Boulder, our own Abby Daniels, Denise Grimm, who worked for the county's historic preservation program for 27 years, and Frank Archuleta, who's a activist and community historian in Lafayette. So I know Alex was able to make it as well as John, and just wanted to do a recap of a good night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was my first time going to that event and learned a lot. One thing that was cool was I think Martha grew up at 16th and Bluebell in a house that's built by the same person at the same time as my initial childhood home was like a twin of that house that the twins grew up in. So yeah.
I went last year and I thought it was a great event. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to make it, particularly in recognition of Abby Daniels. I would have liked to have seeing her. Okay, I'm ready to adjourn the meeting. If everybody is good with that, we'll adjourn the Landmarks Board June meeting at 7:15.
A record.